Welcome to another segment of our After Hours Screen Talk. I'm Jesse and I'm here with my bro Dan, and we wanted to chat and talk a little bit about some 2022 horror films that we haven't had a chance to cover. And these are X and then its sequel, prequel, Pearl. And we wanted just to share our thoughts, give a review of them, and just kind of explore those two films in comparison with one another. X is set in 1979. The premise is that this group of actors go to rural Texas to film an adult movie, a porno, and then they rent a guest house from this elderly couple, and then things go horribly wrong. The main character of X is Maxine, played by Mia Goth. She also plays the elderly woman, the wife in this couple in Texas, named Pearl. So the follow-up film, Pearl, deals with her backstory. Pearl is more of a character study, whereas I see X as more in the horror film vein. Pearl goes further back in time. I think that's set in like 1918 during World War One. Pearl's husband, Howard, is away at the war. While he's away, she is asked by her domineering mother to care for her ailing father and help out with the farm. Pearl feels like she's in this box's cage. She wants to live this glamorous life that she's seen in Hollywood films or in movies. First of all, I love the director, Tyler West. I've always been a big fan of him since his breakout movie, The House of the Devil. In a lot of his films, he always incorporates like retro, earlier styles of filmmaking. We both have been wanting to see both these films for a while and just haven't got a chance. So having seen them, what do you think?
Oh, I really like both of them. Of the two, I think that I prefer Pearl, but I love both of them. I think that they're both really great films. There really are carefully thought out artistic visions. Ty West clearly had an agenda that was multi-layered. He wanted to make great horror films, but he also wanted to pursue intellectual interests. And I think especially what's striking about these films is the way that they're on a metatextual level exploring the ways in which cinema itself has been a vehicle for a lot of things in our culture, a vehicle for desire, disappointment, dismay, and of course, horror. And what I was especially struck with X is the way that West really, I think, deftly references and invokes the aesthetic of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, and it's very clear that that's the inspiration because the references are, it's interesting. They're on the nose, but they don't feel like empty pastiche.
I love how you have that character, the director, TJ, I think his name is, who has this ideal that he's going to make a really kind of artistically, professionally made film. It's going to have artistic merit, even though it's an American hardcore movie. And I think that's really referencing that time in the 70s where there's that boom in the adult film industry. And adult films, you had like big box office successes like Deep Throat and The Devil in Miss Jones that were critically well received, did well at the box office, and they were rivaling mainstream studio films and getting kind of some kind of credibility and respect. So that kind of character wasn't out of place given like the time period.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of the, again, I think West thought about the film aesthetics he was applying to both of these films really carefully because 1979, when the first film X takes place, I mean that's the transition point, the important historical transition point. The old Hollywood, classical Hollywood system has fallen away, and it's being replaced by what eventually becomes known as New Hollywood, or the New Hollywood cinema, new industrial and economic paradigm. But what really changes is that the film-going audience is conceptualized and addressed differently, and especially there is this new emphasis on youth. So, you know, that's the era of Jaws, eventually Star Wars, and the coveted 18 to 49 demographic emerges as the major buying demographic, the ones who really consume and have disposable income to do so. So there's this new emphasis on youth and appealing to youth. And Pearl and her husband and people like them, the elderly, are no longer centered as consumers and by extension as citizens or as subjects anymore. They're marginalized in this new system, which increasingly is obsessed with and fetishizes and emphasizes youth and young people.
The actors are not actually elderly people or old people playing those characters. They're in prosthetics and makeup. It's Mia Goth playing Pearl, and I forget the actor's name who plays Howard, but he's in prosthetics as well. And so the fact that they're made up like that just gives them this kind of grotesque, exaggerated quality from the get-go, that there's something not right there.
I can't say enough about the work that Mia Goth does in both of these films. I mean, if these were different kinds of films, if they weren't, so-called B-movie horror films, we'd be talking about her for the award circuit, right?
Her performance had shades of Betty Davis in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, a similar kind of character to Pearl. That's also a pretty frightening movie.
One of the ultimate biddy horror films, right? The idea of biddy horror is central to X, of course. So
biddy horror. Now, I've heard the term. What is that again?
A horror that deals with usually elderly, specifically elderly female characters who become monsters. So like Rabid Granny is, and then of course X is very much biddy horror. This older woman who's I wouldn't even characterize her sexual appetites as voracious, though. I mean, what makes her a monster is that she kills people. The fact that she wants to, that's just human, man. Sex is really not the problem here. There are other things that are problematic. And if sex is the problem, then I think that says more about the attitudes we bring to the films than anything else. Because Pearl's sexuality, the fact that she desires in the way that she does for sex, is clearly the least problematic thing about her. In Pearl, I think we get the strong implication that this is a psychopathic character. To the extent that we can talk about realistic, clinical diagnoses for these characters at all. I mean, she's on this track of torturing animals and killing them, feeding them to her gator. So that darkness is regardless of what else is influencing it.
So one of the continuities between the two films is the character of this crocodile who shows up every now and then. Pearl befriends it, and in X particularly, there's some memorable murder sequences where the crocodile plays a role. And she names the crocodile Theta, which is a reference to the silent film actress named Theta Bara.
One of cinema's early sex symbols.
Who I believe was known for playing these femme fatale kind of characters. I think her nickname was the Vamp, and the Vamp became a term in early films referring to women who played these kinds of sexually domineering, seductive female characters who were breaking away from patriarchal conceptions of women. And Theta Bara became known for this. I think you can see Pearl similarly as, if not a femme fatale figure, at least an aspiring femme fatale figure. In X, she desires to be that seductive female character like a Theta Bara. She wants to have that magnetic stage presence and attraction, and then gets furious and rage-fueled when she's rejected and her advances are rejected, and then ends up brutally killing several of the characters. And we haven't discussed her husband, Howard, who we just learned so little about him, and all we know is that he's not satisfying her in the way she wants.
He really only matters as an emissary, as an acolyte for her. It's interesting that he's as underdrawn as he is. The only thing we know for sure about him is that he's fiercely devoted to her, devoted enough to kill for her and provide her with sex slaves and sex objects. That great reveal in X where we find out there's this naked hung corpse that she's obviously been molesting and torturing for her sexual appetites, or her murderous psychopathic appetites. That's one of the great reveals in both films.
Her sexual repression and suppressed desires are making her like kill people and kill animals.
I think that's one of the most interesting thing about both of the films is that they're such multi-layered, dense texts. Both of them are, and I think that a common thread between them, certainly not the only one, is that this relationship between the ostensibly hedonistic, promiscuous, pornographic sexuality and bohemian lifestyle we see the characters inhabiting in X, in the wake of the flower child movement and the counterculture. On the other extreme of that is the puritanical strain that we see reflected on the televangelist, whom we later, of course, find out is Maxine's father. And that's the great reveal too, right? You're talking about a horror reveal. That's it. What's revealed is the true origin of this horror. The true origin of this horror in both Pearl and X is the traditional conservative Judeo-Christian heteronormative paradigm. It produces these female monsters as surely as any system would. It works in cohort with the emergent Hollywood cinema to present this impossible choice for the female subject. You either be a good girl and consign yourself to a world of repressive, claustrophobic toil in which your desires are always secondary if they rate at all, or you become an object of consumption and live through the desire of the other. And either way, you're relegated to a kind of half-life, a ghostly form of undead existence.
The daughter of this televangelist has become a porno actress. So the flip side to Puritanism and repression is this kind of reveling in excess and transgression. And then Pearl takes it to another level. And you said, Dan, you preferred Pearl to X.
Like I said, I really do like both of them. And I don't mean to disrespect X by saying I prefer Pearl. I just think Pearl was the more striking film because there are points where it really is just pure Hollywood melodrama, completely straight and sincere. And so there are moments in that film where I'm very conscious that Pearl is a generic hybrid in a way that is less true of X. And because it's a generic hybrid, I find it kind of interesting and thought-provoking in a way that X isn't, at least not in the same way. So, the moments of horror in Pearl, when they erupt, they're really true and striking. But like I said, the way that I feel myself pulled between melodrama and horror in Pearl was really unique.
There's a relationship between Maxine and Pearl, of course. They're played by the same actress. In X, Pearl, at several points, comes on to Maxine. On the part of Pearl, Maxine represents this fantasy for Pearl, reflecting this cult of beauty and youth. And that's what's sold to us in Hollywood and the adult film industry. I was interested in the way that introduces this component of voyeurism.
The voyeuristic character on a storytelling level relates to the dynamic that Pearl is caught in, and I should say the psychodynamic that Pearl finds herself in regarding Maxine and regarding youth.
Yeah.
So I think it's a commentary in that sense. Pornography in the film and voyeurism in the film becomes a major function of one of the central strands of film. That there is a pornographic, voyeuristic element to all film, no matter how subtle or artistic or culturally upstanding and edifying it may be, and that hardcore pornography is simply the crudest manifestation of that.
Yeah, totally with you on that. One scene there, I think that brings those juxtapositions between the horror and the melodrama is when she meets this projectionist played by David Corenswet. What's his name? The guy who's playing the new Superman. He just got cast as Superman.
Oh, really? Okay. That's an interesting little bit of
yeah
trivia.
Anyway, she goes to the movies and she sees like this stag film from the early 1920s. I think it's called A Free Ride.
But would have been before the 1920s. Remember, the film is in 1918.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, even earlier. And so the film is referencing, yes, melodramas, The Wizard of Oz, and that kind of fantasy of an innocent kind of older Hollywood, but then immediately like breaks that fantasy by showing you another aspect of early Hollywood. You had these stag films, and some of the earliest films ever made were pornographic in nature. When you talk about stag films, those films were made covertly. They couldn't make those openly because of censorship restrictions. They were made illicitly. They weren't legal at the time. Of course, those censorship rules loosened up in the 70s, and then the porn industry really took off, and that's its quote golden age. But even within old Hollywood, that kind of censorship didn't stop those films from being made. And the flip side to that kind of censorship is this kind of excess, that is directly tied up with it. Because when you repress and censor something, it's going to come out anyway, and it may come out in a more grotesque, even maybe monstrous, grotesque form, and be even more excessive because of the repression. And then the stag film is what inspires her to try out for this dance troupe. She has this like innocent view and glamorous notion of what that's going to be.
Also, I think it's interesting from a historical level, films, the film art as a respectable medium, an art form for middle class society. In 1918, that debate is still ongoing, and many people think that cinema in this moment is a crass commercial materialistic thing. In places like Germany and elsewhere, it was actually treated explicitly as pornographic. So women who made films, whether or not they were pornographic, were considered kind of like prostitutes because they were objectifying themselves, making themselves objects for consumption. And so the idea of putting oneself on display and being an object that's viewed by somebody, viewed by an audience, for a long time, there's a debate about the propriety of this medium. And of course, we still have that debate in lots of ways. We have that debate about TV and about the other visual arts. So the stag film is a shaping moment for her, but it's not fundamentally different from what her relationship to film and to the image already is.
When she's watching the stag film, there's no mention of sex or that it's made for pornographic reasons, but that association is there, particularly after she sees the movie and she is on her way home, riding home on her bike. And then this is where the most direct like Wizard of Oz reference comes in, where in the cornfield she sees a scarecrow. To just like with the way age and the elderly are represented here, the scarecrow is like an emblem of death, almost. Like it looks really macabre when you see it. It's not.
I think it is actually a corpse. I think we're meant to think this is a corpse from the influenza epidemic that somebody has repurposed as a scarecrow.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, what ends up happening is she takes the scarecrow down and starts fantasizing about having sex with this projectionist and masturbating. Pornography is not directly referenced or made direct in the stag film. Regarding the stag film, it's definitely there as an undercurrent, and even if her character is not consciously aware of it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the clear implication is that Maxine and Pearl, subjects like them, are only possible because of these repressive paradigms that they come from. If you posit something, interpolate something as sinful and evil and wrong, you also create it as a desire, a temptation. And we've seen that. You can point to X number of examples for that, no pun intended.
And the title X is totally apt for the movie. It refers to, of course, the adult film industry, but also X has this association with the mysterious and the unknown. And so the very title kind of links horror with that kind of very themes of pornography and repression and sexual craving.
What X comes to stand for in both films is one of my favorite parts about the whole experience of watching both of them, and that I was just especially struck. My favorite part of Pearl is when she goes for her audition and steps onto her mark on the stage. What does she step onto? She steps onto an X. And
Yeah.
there's the symbol that identifies Maxine. So X means hardcore, it means sex, and means pornography. But it's also an Xing out. It stands for erasure. It stands for the splitting, the crossing out that happens with Pearl, and that doesn't quite happen with Maxine and Pearl are mirror images of each other, but they're also very different. I really look forward to seeing what happens with Maxine in the third film, what kind of arc they put her character on. Really, really interested in that, and I'm waiting with bated breath to see how Maxine plays out and how the X reoccurs and what it comes to stand for and where we'll end up with this trilogy.
Maxine, from what I've heard, is set in the 80s and follows Maxine's character in the 80s, where you have like the video cassette boom, which ended up taking over the adult film industry. And so when that happened, it kind of cheapened the production values because they could put everything on video cassette and make lots of money off it. And that became the whole point, to make money, capitalize it. And so porn became more openly like gratuitous and not as concerned with artistic merit in the 80s. And so it'll be interesting to me, just on a meta level with Maxine, how it's going to approach the 80s. And particularly, I imagine you're going to be getting a look into the adult film industry, because I assume Maxine is not going to stop being an actress.
Well,
So
the title is Maxine spelled with three X's, so certainly she's
yeah,
continuing on that career track if the title is any indication.
glad I got to see both films because they've been on my list for a while, and I wanted to catch up on 2022 like horror films that I haven't seen. So I'm glad I watched these. They were definitely enjoyable watch.
These are the kinds of films that make me believe in cinema as an art form again. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So those are our thoughts on X and its prequel Pearl. Let us know if you're a fan of the horror genre, if you've seen the films, and share your comments below. And we'll be making another one of these videos pretty soon. So look forward to that, and we'll see you next time.